What up, everybody? It's your boy Omega. I'm not staying on the show, folks. I'm not even standing in. I'm going to be the man in the chair tonight because our boy Nem, unfortunately, doesn't feel too well. So this is why I wanted to come on and just say, yo, my brother, may you get well really soon, bro. But don't you worry, man, because your crew is here today. And who is this crew? Let me start introducing them. First up, El Señor, the independent comic book creator himself, amazing artist that has been like pimping himself all over Twitter. The one and only Mr. Bracey. How you doing, kiddo?
Good to see you again, Al. Always a pleasure to be here on the show.
Oh man, likewise, brother. And let me bring up the other independent creator that has been blasting on labels everywhere, just murdering it, and then doing awesome pieces as well for Comic Crusaders, bro. Digging deep into the X-Men, and now Daredevil, the one and only Mr. Shadewing.
Hi, glad to be here, and I will say, Nem, I hope you get well soon. We're looking forward to having you back, and I'm looking forward to getting into this movie because Shakespeare is kind of like my jam, so I can't wait to talk about this.
And last but not least, the one and only, an independent award-winning comic book creator, independent film creator. I mean, my man got crowns and diamonds everywhere. He's just hiding them right now, being all humble. Is the one and only Mr. Lance Lucero. What's popping, kiddo?
Hey! It's good to be back. It's good to be back with the Cinema Crusaders. This is awesome. And I hope Nem gets better soon. So we're all pulling for him.
It's definitely a shout out, man. Yeah. So tell the people before I go, what movie are you discussing tonight?
It is the Tragedy of Macbeth, the Joel Coen version.
Oh shit! All right, people, y'all about to get deep. So y'all about to lose me when it comes to this Shakespeare stuff, man. This Puerto Rico gets completely lost. Like, hopefully, I'm gonna stand in the background here, put up the pretty little stuff that I could find, and hopefully learn about this amazing movie that you guys are like telling me like, yo, this is dope. So. Can you convince Omega to watch this? We'll find out at the end.
We will find out at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm stepping out, fellas. Have a kick-ass show.
All righty. Thank you. Wow. Check that out. The kids are left to play. You know what I mean? There's no holds barred on this one.
That's right. Daddy's not at home.
How many rolls can we break before he comes back? No, we're not.
You're right. Let's cause some trouble. No, we're good. Well, Tragedy of Macbeth. This is something to talk about because it's interesting. I may have a varying opinion. I think I will.
Yeah, I think so, and it's not necessarily. I think it's actually instructive because I think you're looking at it as more of a filmmaker. You're looking at it in terms of their techniques and what they're doing, which I think is interesting. I'm looking at more as somebody who has taught Shakespeare for years. So I'm more looking at it in terms of how well they adapted the material. And Jeff's going to bring what he brings to the table as always. So I think it's going to be. I think we're going to get a very interesting, shall we say, meeting of the minds, as it were.
I'm looking forward to it.
I might have a different perspective from the two of you because I'm also coming at it from a theater perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if that's the case, Shadewing, why don't you give us the hoedown? Give us the rundown of the story, just a synopsis of it.
Sure. I think most people probably are aware that this is a Scottish film. This was made by Shakespeare towards the end of his career after Queen Elizabeth had passed and James I was on the throne of Scotland. Yes. So since the country was under new management, as it were, Shakespeare had to do a movie that kind of appealed, to the new king coming in, and that was Macbeth.
You mean a play?
You mean the theater?
Yeah, play. Yeah. I'm thinking of that. Back then, that was the movies of their era. So
exactly.
We kind of look at it in those terms. So the idea was, okay, as Shakespeare often did, he looked into historical stories, tried to see, what kind of story that he could get from the history as he understood it, which was not the same as we understand it today. So there, of course, there are going to be some historical inaccuracies. The story takes place in the 12th century, after around the time when King Duncan is fighting against Norway, and we see that one of the Scottish thanes, who had the title of Thane of Cawdor, basically betrays Duncan to the Norwegians, and so Macbeth, in his turn, defeats the Norwegians with the help of Banquo, and basically on the way back to Duncan, they run across 3 witches. Now we see that it's 1 witch in this movie. We're going to get into that,
Right.
but it's three witches, and so they prophesize essentially that Macbeth will become king of Scotland, and they also prophesize that Banquo will get kings, shall we say father kings, but he will not be one. And so this is really often a case where a lot of the tragedy that ensues, it's because they are misrepresenting the prophecy in ways that suits their interests. And Macbeth decides to do this with the help of his wife to, shall we say, hasten the process by killing the king and taking his place himself. And we see and basically somebody who kind of starts off as a heroic figure, a respected figure, but because he kills the king and then he does all of these cover-ups, to make sure that nobody finds out what he did, he goes farther and farther to the dark side, becoming a greater tyrant as the guilt of what they did comes back in various ways, whether it's Macbeth imagining the ghost of Banquo. It's kind of left ambiguous as to whether it's a real ghostly visitation or not, or if it's by his wife, who was also involved in the conspiracy, basically losing her mind. And so you see the descent of these people into madness, and that's the tragedy, because you have people that could have been good people, but because of their greed and ambition, they basically go to the dark side, they lose their minds, they just go off the deep end, and then they die. And that's basically what the story is. And it's been told and retold many times, performed in different versions. Actually, even recently, there's been a Michael Fassbender version of it. So this is a classic story and one of Shakespeare's more reputable ones.
Right. Wow. Well put. I think that covers all the bases. I mean, yeah. In a nutshell. So, I mean, looking at it, I mean, it was a surprise that this even happened when I discovered it. I was like, okay, is it a Coen brother film? And as we find out, it isn't. It's Joel doing his own thing. The production team being him and his wife, Frances McDermott. So I guess my initial thought is that you guys will probably remember this, but remember in the old days when we were kids, we would get the BBC imports like on PBS, and it would be kind of like a videotaped version of a theatrical play. Sometimes you would have big name actors or up and coming actors that were starting in the theater, or real bona fide stars of theater doing the theater renditions that were videotaped, and that for PBS. So that one right there, that's a perfect one. I remember seeing that one, and this is what it kind of reminded me of when I first started watching it, kind of like a lower budget videotape of Shakespeare in a theater realm, because it was all shot in a studio. It was quick and easy, and that had an effect on me when I started watching it. I'm like, well, theatrically, it could have been something, I think, a lot more meaty and bigger. But to me, it was terribly watered down. And it just reminded me of a high-dollar version of the BBC stuff that introduced me to Shakespeare, that theatrically and cinematically introduced me. So it kind of felt like a big-budgeted, watered-down version of something really, really good. And I did see the route they went with, okay, it's shot in black and white. Okay, well, it's not shot in black and white. There's a color version that exists. It's shot on HD. It's you either desaturate your colors or you put a mask filter over your colors to turn it into black and white. And I think that's why we see that color difference too, of more of a shade of brown rather than saturated blacks and contrast. So, I mean, to me, it was screaming of, wow, this reminds me of the stuff I watched as a kid, but not as good. I was a little blown away by it. I was like, wow, I went in with high expectations, thinking, okay, you can't, Denzel Washington, okay, I get it. Is this otherworldly, maybe? Because of the racial mixes. I get it. There were Moors in Europe at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I get all of that, but I started to see the casting choice was starting to suck me out as well, because there's something sexy about Shakespeare with English dialect and Scottish dialect. When you hear his prose, that poetic prose, the catchphrases, the slang, the insults, I think it rings really true. And this sometimes really sucked me out. I was kind of like, okay, the urbanization of his dialogue didn't strike me well. But I made it through. I was like, okay, let's just see what this is going to be about. And I think the story, it being one of Shakespeare's shortest tragedies, I think it was maybe a little too short, because I think some elements were missed that could have been fleshed out better for the characters. But my first initial thought was, wow, this reminds me of the old BBC stuff. It reminds me it's just shot on video, theater play. And I guess in general, I was predominantly disappointed. I was like, wow, I had high expectations, and it shocked me, when I was done with it. 'Cause I had to think about it for a while. And that's why behind the scenes, I'm like, hey guys, you want to talk about this flick? I started pushing it. I'm like, This one has confused me a little bit. I don't know what was behind the idea of approaching it this way, but I'm not exactly sure it will go down in one of the successes of an adaptation of Shakespeare. My initial take.
You want to go, Jeff, or
yeah, sure.
I'll go there.
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly who's leading it this time.
Yeah.
In that case, I have the exact opposite reaction. Obviously, the filming it in a theatrical style is very deliberate, and I like the fact it was also filmed in black and white. From the very opening shot, I realized that's exactly what they're going for, and I like it. I like it because I've seen, Mel Gibson's Henry V. I've seen Kenneth Branagh's, not Henry V. Mel Gibson's
Hamlet.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Hamlet. I've seen Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. I've seen, Akira Kurosawa's take on this film, Throne of Blood, which I enjoyed very much. So I've seen the big studio production, and I really like this minimalist approach. It reminds me very much of the similarly dour Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal. I saw a lot of similar imagery in there, so I really dug
There's
that.
a lot of German expressionism in that.
Very
exactly
much,
Absolutely.
You definitely like if they just kind of tilted a lot of the angles a bit more, you'd be right up there with Casket of Dr. Caligari and things like that.
Right.
But they didn't go quite that extreme. But I could feel the influences, and I guess because I've seen so many these other things, the retro approach was very refreshing to me, and also coming from a theater background, I appreciated what they were doing in the setting. And even from a cinematic point of view, I thought some of the transitions were very cinematic, like when Lady Macbeth throws her flaming note into the air and the camera follows up and then comes down, and we see King Duncan walking below the stars. So there's some cinematic technique in there, but it's definitely a filmed theater piece, no doubt about that. I will agree with you that I do like hearing the Shakespearean dialogue in the dialects that it was meant for. I would have liked to have heard, the actual kind of Scottish or the English. There's a certain sort of lyricism that you get when a piece is spoken in either a dialect or an accent that it is meant to be a part of. But I understand also that as much as I'm enjoying the fact that they've got the Shakespearean prose in there, I was like, I wonder how many people are going to have to watch this again and again to get it, because we're so Americanized over here, and a lot of people don't have appreciation for that. I was digging the fact that the language was in keeping as much as they could with the American accents, but I really enjoy seeing things that are apart. Like, for instance, seeing Mel Gibson's Apocalypto and seeing that all done in the South American dialects. was very exciting. I like foreign films. I'm all about the subtitles and hearing the words as they were meant to be spoken to me. So I know that's not going to be everybody's bag. And, you know, when you're doing a Hollywood production, you're looking for mass appeal. So you get as much return on your investment as you can get. But I've got to agree, there also can't be that big an investment because you have scaled down your sets. Now, the sets they have were impressive for a theater piece, but they're not the huge, world, globe-trotting, finding locations sort of things that you would get out of a major movie production. So I can see why that would dissatisfy you quite a bit there, Lance. But for me, it felt kind of fresh that they took this approach. And so, and maybe it's just because I was a theater guy for many years. I really dug this, and I did think some of the casting choices were a little bit weird. I know this is the sort of thing we do in media these days, and even given that there were Moors available in Europe at the time, some of the choices still struck me as a little off. But other than that, I thought that most of the players were really good, and overall, I enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, I'm closer to your position, Jeff, on this. I generally enjoyed it quite a lot. And I think part of it is because we haven't seen this kind of filmmaking in a very, very long time, even though I totally get Lance's criticisms and where he's coming from. I think that the idea, and there are a couple of reasons. One of them is that this is a particularly otherworldly story. I think that was a perfect word to use.
Yeah.
Otherworldly is basically what this story is. You're dealing a story that involves prophecies, that involves witches, that involves Scottish legend and things like of that nature. And so you're dealing with a story that can be wrapped up in these very otherworldly elements, and it's not out of place because of the story elements that are involved. And so because of that, I can kind of forgive, at least to a certain extent, some of the casting decisions. I definitely had mixed feelings about Denzel as Macbeth. I mean, he clearly does not look Scottish, not at all. And then they call him, and then you have the king calling him kinsman, and you can tell that these people are not blood related in any way. I mean, this kinds of stuff you definitely have those kinds of moments that take you out of it. But they said that they cast Macbeth because Denzel Washington's Macbeth because he was classically trained, and there were not many classically trained Shakespearean style actors who played well opposite Frances McDormand. I can understand that issue. And I will say Denzel does have a very good rapport with her. I think that they are good. The two of them are good together. And Denzel is the kind of actor who usually brings it to the table. Yeah, I would have liked to have had the Scottish accent. I would have liked all of that. But I would say that we kind of had that version with the last film. That is very much rooted in the historical version, in the historical Scotland, with actors that are very much more inclined to the historical reality of that. So for this particular take, I was a little bit more okay with this one being more out there, being more otherworldly, being more unrealistic. Because I think that there's kind of like a dreamlike quality that this movie is aiming for. If that's the case, I think that did capture that. There are definite flaws with it. I do feel like there were some of the CGI elements were a little obvious, especially with the birds. You can definitely tell, like they did sort of what they did with Star Wars, the Book of Boba Fett, where you can tell they had a green screen around this desert setting. Or just putting in like all these CGI birds and things like that. Just to put that in. So there were kind of those moments, but I would say for the most part, did it adapt to Shakespeare well? I would say generally it did. Some of the moments where you see visual elements used as an interpretation of the play was interesting. The fact that the door handle in front of the king's door looks like a dagger.
That was one of my favorite elements. Yes. I love that.
So when you have, Denzel doing "Is this the dagger that I see before me?" You kind of get an interesting take on that because of those visual elements. You also get, interpretations like Ross offering the sword to Denzel to kill the traitor, which is, I mean, that was not in the script. That was something that Joel Coen interpreted in there. And I thought that was a really interesting moment. So you have a lot of these interesting takes, with the surrealistic visuals, with the German expressionist style, all these kinds of things. I think it's an interesting take, combining the Shakespeare with the expressionism. So while I get the criticisms, and I can totally see where you guys are coming from with the various things that you've said, for myself, I really enjoyed it just because of what it was able to provide, even though I acknowledge that there were things that didn't work.
It's interesting when Bracey mentioned the fact that, in a sense, this is more an intimate version rather than the big scope, but rather than the grand of everything. And when you're that intimate, when you're in the face of those characters, when you're doing that 1:3:3 or that 4:3 aspect ratio, and it's up to the character to sell it. And there are moments, more moments than not, that I felt that I think as performers, they need to understand the prose they're speaking. So at many a moment, I felt as though they were reciting the dialogue rather than acting. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I see it. This is tough stuff here. This is tough stuff to articulate. And it takes a lot of effort. So at points, the movie was shot like in 36 days. It had a very fast schedule. And this is a lot of stuff to remember, but you're dealing with a movie here. You got takes. You can do certain things over and over again. But it still felt to me that like there were moments, even with inner thoughts, that kind of rhetoric that Macbeth was going through, it seemed like Denzel was reciting rather than acting.
For the first scene, especially after the witches and when he's contemplating in the tent, after he's found out he's just being granted another thaneship, I had the exact same thought, because like I'm clearly not an Academy Award winning actor, but I kept thinking, like, I couldn't help but think, like, how would I approach the way the dialogue's being presented? And I kept feeling like, I feel like he is just reciting. I don't feel like he really found his groove till later in the film, when I felt like he was actually acting the words instead of just kind of putting them out there.
Right. And it's kind of those things where, cinematically, you just look back like, this is a hard one to beat, but Sir Laurence Olivier, when you see him like in Henry V or something, and or Othello or Richard III, and when he is acting, that dialogue just seems to flow out. I mean, you can see it in his face, you can see it in his expressions. Whereas in this version, I think a lot of the people were reciting more than they were acting. I think the person that hit it closest was Frances McDermott. I think she nailed it. I was like, okay, I can buy what she's doing. But even in situations like when Macduff finds out his family's killed, I don't need him to fall to his knees and scream to the heavens in pain, but give me a little bit more here. It was like, and this is the heavy that's supposed to take care of business at the end of the movie. And I didn't buy it at all. I just did not buy his performance as the pained Avenger. You know what I mean? It was just like, when I seen his reactions, I was like, is that it? Your whole family has just been wiped out. Everything that you care about. Is that all you're going to do? I thought, okay. So I think maybe now, when you really think about it generationally, I don't know really how newer performers are being trained. I have no idea. I don't know what methods they're doing. I don't know. But to have Shakespeare handed to you is a hefty ordeal, because that dialogue, you need to sell it. And I felt that's where the biggest shortcoming of this movie was the performers not selling the dialogue. They weren't selling their character. I mean, when you get good moments from Denzel Washington, and to me, like I said, Frances McDermott was solid, and Brendan Gleeson, he nailed it. But other than that, wow, I hate to say it, the supporting cast, they really came up short in my book, because that camera's right in your face. There's nowhere to hide. You got to be right on it, and that's one thing that kind of distracted me a little bit. I mean, what's your take on that?
I think you've nailed it here. Like, how are the younger actors? How's this new generation being trained? Because I did feel like, aside from Denzel, who I felt like he he found his groove once he started interacting with Mcdermott, as a matter of fact, because it seemed like her emoting gave him the reason to emote more when he was not so much Macbeth in his thoughts, but when he started to have his doubts. That's when I started seeing Denzel come out and actually perform the material. But as you said, these supporting cast, specifically the younger people in the cast, I wonder how many of them have had that theater experience. And when you've performed it in the theater as opposed to performing something on camera, it's a vastly different experience, and it requires a different set of skills. And back in the day, so many of our actors coming up who went to Hollywood, a lot of them would have the theater experience. They would have started out, in New York City on theater, and before they transitioned into movies. So they learned both sets of skills, and they figured out how to apply them to separate mediums like that. And I think that's what's lacking here.
Yeah, and you get a feeling that some of it maybe is to be inexperience, or maybe just inexperience with the material particularly. I would recommend watching a series on Amazon called Shakespeare Uncovered, which kind of shows how established experienced actors get into a lot of these Shakespearean roles, and it's very, very interesting. And I'm getting the feeling that, at least in some of the cases, particularly like with Macduff, I agree Macduff really was not very good.
I also couldn't help but think about one thing I read. Anthony Hopkins was giving an interview about his process. They talk about, like, you're the best living actor in the world right now. He reads the script 200 times. Mm-hmm. He knows it backwards and forwards. This allows him to do anything he wants to do with material. If he wants to try something, he can try something new on every single take. And I remember just doing plays and just trying to get material down in a short amount of time. It's a difficult thing to do, and especially if you're doing something that can be as complex as Shakespeare. Yeah, that's a big burden.
It's not just the dialogue; it's understanding where the character is at that given moment when you're reading these lines, and understanding the psychology of these characters. With somebody like Macbeth, you really need to understand how killers process guilt, how killers process their experiences. What their pathology is, all these kinds of things. You have to understand these things if you want to understand, how, Macbeth goes and convicts the murder, how he is completely agitated after he's killed the king, and then he brings in the knives, the bloody knives, without even thinking about it. And here you have Lady Macbeth. It's like, what are you doing? We need to bring them back to the crime scene so we can go and go ahead and blame these guards. These kinds of things require that kind of subtle touch and that understanding of who the character is, and an understanding of how to read these lines, what Shakespeare actually is saying, and not just in its singular meaning. And a lot of times these lines have multiple meanings, and so you have to understand all of them and how to deliver each of them in a way that's convincing. And that takes a lot of experience and talent.
Yeah, and that's it. It's delivering it, because it's almost like doing a film in a foreign language. Because you have to understand what the words of this period mean, the nuance that's using them. And when I see somebody like Doug Jones in Pan's Labyrinth, who doesn't know Spanish, and he learned his lines phonetically, but he got translations of what he was saying, so he understood where to put in the emphasis. He understood how to...
Or Bela Lugosi, who we talked about before. I mean,
yes.
He didn't understand a word of English, and, coming in from Romania, and he got
it perfect. But you never know that watching the film.
Right. Right.
And that could be also, that falls on the shoulders of the director.
Yeah.
The director is there to direct the performers and get that performance out of them. And it's almost like, here's the dialogue, go for it. And it's like, well, that's not enough, because especially with your aspect ratio, you're right in people's faces. They have to be convinced they know what they're saying. And to me, that was the biggest thing that sucked me out of the movie was, I'm ready for these meaty lines. I'm ready for, all these catchphrases that we know, by the prickling of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes, and so forth and so on. You wait for those meaty lines, and then you see it fall flat. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is a big production here. These people are making a movie. What happened? What happened versus Joel Coen and Frances McDermott versus a Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson. You know what I mean?
I mean, even looking at I don't remember the name of the film, but it was John Turturro and Peter Boyle did a gangster version of Macbeth, and their end confrontation has so much more impact than Macbeth and Macduff there, because it just lacked that emotional resonance. You just didn't feel the righteous anger or the justice being rendered in that scene. And it was
Right.
like, and on top of that, they really boxed themselves in by having the fight on the parapet. And so for me, as a guy who studied martial arts, it also bugged me. It lost impact because it just became baseball bat swings with swords. Yeah. And so there was no martial choreography, where we'd just seen some pretty nifty martial choreography in the scene before.
Right. You know, I agree with you there. It's hitting swords together, not trying to kill your enemy. And to me, that's a stunt faux pas. It's like, you know, I don't need the grandiose of the sword swinging around and looking great. You know, if two guys are really going at each other, that's when you work your camera angles. That's when you make it look like they're trying to hit each other. But this looked like it was, let's just bang swords together.
Yeah. And the emotional content
it looks like they were trying to do it in a way that they did it in the 1930s, when like Errol Flynn and people like that were working, and Bob Anderson was doing those sorts of things.
But Errol Flynn was so much better.
Then it does not work in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a whole different vibe. So you know, the whole thing about it is does it sell? Does this version of Shakespeare sell? And in my mind, it came up extremely short on selling Shakespeare. So if you want a new generation to look at Shakespeare, is this what you're pointing to? I wouldn't.
No, that's a good point. That is a good point, especially because I don't know how many young people go to the theater these days. That was always an interest of mine. Yeah. But I can see where you're coming from, where you need more of a spectacle. You need something more going on. And because they had this very surrealistic, very minimalist setting, you know, like even the beds were just kind of flat pieces of concrete and things. Like you said, it doesn't have a whole lot of visual interest for somebody who is outside of that realm. You know, I guess I might be the target demographic, you know, somebody like me who's really into theater and cinematics and acting and performance, things like that. But I think you've hit on a very important thing. I don't know if that's going to bring new people in to check out Shakespeare or check out the theater or even check out the movie.
I would not use this to teach class. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. It was a trip. I was excited. I mean, I was like, wow, this is something interesting. And then I had to think about it. After I was done with it, I thought about it a long time and thought, well, I believe this is the one. This one missed the mark. On many different, you know, levels, in my opinion, and primarily because I like the story. You know, this is a meaty story. Yep. You know, you see like the Throne of Blood version, you know, 1957, Akira Kurosawa, and you're blown away by it, not only cinematically, but by the acting. You know, they sell it. So I don't know what it is, man. Is it laziness? Is it just having something to do with big name people? You know, I scratch my head on why this even, you know, made it to a finished product.
It kind of reminds me of Joss Whedon's version of the one with Benedict and Beatrice. That play. I'm blanking on the name. But basically,
Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah, that's Much Ado About Nothing. Yeah, he basically filmed it in his house, brought his friends over, and just did it because he thought it would be fun. I'm beginning to think that there might have been some of that with Coen, where it's like, okay, I'm going to make this Shakespearean film. My wife wants to do it. It sounds like something that would be interesting to do. You know, we can do it in a minimalist style and just have fun with it. And rather than because they had really any real deep, serious intent with it, there could have been a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, and that's something that nowadays cinema in general you have to be careful of, because it's becoming a mainstay. Faster, easier, just get it out with a little bit of flair.
That's why we've got so much found footage.
Yeah, and it's one of those things of let's how do you scale it back again? How do you get to the meat of it? I mean, they had all the right components up front. So to me, it's kind of weird how this how it came about. But overall, yeah, I thought, wow, what a shame.
I think there are grand ambitions. I think that there are things that I like about it, and I think I like that they're trying to do a kind of cinema that we haven't seen in many decades. I can respect it for that. It's just that there are a lot of pieces that don't quite fit the way that they needed to, and it could have just benefited from better casting and maybe better direction in some aspects.
Yeah, because like for me, I was kind of geeking out on like the way they were framing the shots because of the theater aspect. Certain things they did, like I remember this a literal spotlight moment, and you even hear the sound of a spotlight clicking on.
Right.
Because they have these big holes in their castle for some reason. They just let rain come falling in because it is this weirdly, unrealistically surreal world. But they frame that as a spotlight, and there's a part of me that was charmed by that. But then again, I'm an old theater head, so not everybody is going to get that. And so you've got to understand who you want to be your audience. So something like this that ended up being so niche, this might have worked out better as, say, an Amazon or a Netflix original than something that is going to be released in theaters. Or
it was an Apple original.
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense to me. If they put this out in theaters, I don't think it would get anything at all. And honestly, when you guys brought it up for review, I was kind of surprised that I hadn't heard of it before. I hadn't seen any promotion of it.
Right.
I've been seeing a lot of regular, shall we say, tweets about it from Apple TV, just like the regular, things that are like sponsored tweets, those kinds of things. And I
you
was
would think
okay, when is it coming out? I want Aldo to get this for us.
I mean, you think with this powerhouse cast, you've got Denzel, Mcdermott, and others in there who are quite well known and recognized, and you would think this would be the kind of thing like, hey guys, check this out. But like this one caught me completely off guard. So I was like, oh,
same here.
How did I miss this?
Yeah, I didn't see it coming. I was like, oh, well, okay. Yeah, interesting. It's a tough racket, Shakespeare, but it takes a well-disciplined mind to tackle it. It's definitely not easy, even in other renditions. I mean, we've seen Shakespeare in space. We've seen Shakespeare in other worldly settings or alternate dimensions, World War II or whatever it might be.
Volstagg from Thor is Falstaff. I mean, that's how often the bard has been used for inspiration in just about every genre by virtually anybody you care to know.
Let's not forget the California version with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. How's that for a take on Shakespeare?
I did forget that one. The moment I saw it,
hand me my sword, and he hands you a 9mm with like sword on it.
yeah. I think that's Baz Luhrmann, right? Was that Baz Luhrmann?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, another interesting take, and I felt the same way with that one. I guess now that you mentioned it, that I did with this one. It sounded like the kids were reciting their lines. I didn't see the acting that's needed to push it forward, but in a nutshell, that's
that's the Fassbender version. Yeah, and you can definitely see it looks very much like a Scottish war, and somebody who had been fighting battles for years. It was a version that really focused a lot more on PTSD and trauma and how that affects somebody, and that was a really interesting take as well. So there are a lot of really different ways that you can take Macbeth that are perfectly valid and interesting.
Right. And this image, remember we saw this image, somebody did post that image of the witch with the seventh seal right above it.
Yep, that clear Bergman influence. And I got to say, despite any other flaws in here, I love the way the witch is handled. I love that the weird sisters are, you get the idea. Are they one? Are they three? Is it a real train? The brilliant photography of having the reflections be two. with the one witch above, and then we get like a little change, and they're all together. I love how they did that.
Is it one person and Denzel is just imagining they're three?
Well,
is it a trick of the light? I mean, what? Or are there really three people there? And we're just seeing it that
he's
way.
not the only one who saw her. He's not the only one who saw her. So that takes away the ambiguity for me. Even though there's obviously this supernatural mind play going on, which is kind of inherent in a lot of Shakespeare's works. Yep. But if you want to talk about somebody who sold their role, it is that lady right there who also played the little hermit out in the woods.
Yeah, the old man in the woods.
And I have noticed that she plays each witch a little bit differently.
Yes.
You kind of notice, especially with the way that she moves her arms.
Oh, I love the little
really
flapping crow arms that she would do and things.
Yes. Yeah, she moves
bird
exactly
head
like
movements.
a crow. And to mind F even further, I love the crow imagery because what is a group of crows? A murder.
A murder.
Right. Yep, exactly. And that symbolism, I thought, I really wish they would have pushed that a little bit harder, the crows.
Yeah.
I mean, are there three crows just in his chamber? Is he really hallucinating? I think I would have liked to see a little bit more of that symbolism to make it a little bit more, I guess, dreamlike and delusional.
I think it worked best in one scene, and that was the scene in the throne room or the Great Hall, where Denzel or Macbeth completely loses it because he sees the ghost of Banquo.
Right.
Because you see the crows running around, and he thinks it's Banquo, and you actually see interesting shots back and forth with with Lady Macbeth seeing nothing but the crows, and Macbeth seeing Banquo there. And I just thought the way that they played that juxtaposition and the way they played the imagery, the whole idea of the crow bringing back the idea that Banquo was murdered. I mean, all of that really worked. That was where I felt like that imagery worked. In other scenes and other areas, they really did. They really could have improved that.
Yeah, I agree. This is a weird one. I wonder if it'll be a one shot. I wonder, like we said, is this something that was just for fun, or are we going to see something else like this?
Well, definitely for me, this will be one that I'll keep in my archive, just because I really appreciate the imagery and the stylistic techniques being used, and there are enough good performances in it that it will keep me coming back as well. But it's clearly not the best thing out there.
Right, exactly. And you guys still doing the ratings? You guys still do the ratings against is it Internet Movie Database?
Yeah, we look at IMDb. So like we do like our rating for like how we think the film is, and we also do a segment on whether or not we think a film will is kind of relevant, because a lot of the films we looked at have been older films.
Exactly.
So we said, like, is this a film for today's audience, or will this film stand the test of time? It sounds like we're all in a bit of agreement on that this probably will not be going down as a classic or something that a lot of people will come back to.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that it falls short in that spectrum. And it also, I do not think newer audiences will steer towards it. I don't think they'll make it past the first 5 minutes of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's very
too weird and too experimental for people coming in. And
that's exactly
really
the word I was
the
going to use.
Yeah, I mean, you really would need something that kind of shows a little bit more of the historical context, to bring somebody in to really understand it. And generally with better performances than we've seen in some of these scenes. Particularly with Macduff, that was a big disappointment.
Right,
I really do. I laud the idea of bringing in all these theatrical techniques, and I can even see, like in the final fight on the parapet, where they're doing very heavy-handed stage combat. But my gripe is still the previous fight scene was far better, and audiences are more sophisticated. So, like, if you commit to the bit too much, sometimes you go too far. When you look at Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, where he brought in a lot of the old style of photography and techniques for that film, but he still made it something that would appeal to the audience of the day as well.
Right.
Even when he's playing with like lithographic techniques and like old school camera irising and things like that.
Exactly. And having said that, the idea of hearing the halogen, floodlights go on, that big handle crank and then electricity. I'm kind of wondering too, is that would there have been more appeal if they took more of a theater approach to it, like it was really on a stage and people were watching it. You got to really, when you lay it down on film or video, you really got to think about it. I mean, this is something that's going to be around for a long time, especially with these actors. It's going to go in their catalog. So it was surprising to me, just in general, the take on it.
There's considerations that have to be made. Like, for instance, since you mentioned Joss Whedon a little while ago, when Joss Whedon was filming Buffy the Vampire Slayer, this was before we had the widescreen aspect TVs, and so it was filmed in the classic 4:3 ratio, basically. And when it came out on DVD, they wanted to widen out the frame for the the ratio of the TVs was like 1:6:9 or something like that.
16:9.
Thank you. And it didn't work because Joss had shot it for the previous ratio. And as soon as you widen it out, you can see a guy standing over there holding a microphone, or they're compressing the image and stretching the image, and it just doesn't work. So
that is a big technical problem that they've screwed up the aspect ratios, most definitely. That's why you see now a lot of, because of the HD invasion, you will see a lot of people do a 229 or 239 extra wide. And it's like, why are you doing that with two people talking in a room? You know what I mean? Well, it makes it look more cinematic. It makes it look, well, actually it doesn't. You need to be very careful with your composition. It lends to the storytelling. And those kind of aspect ratios today are shot, with spherical lenses. They're not anamorphically squeezed to give it that nice otherworldly focal length, So the aspect of the 4:3 for Tragedy of Macbeth is to make it more personal, to get right in their faces, to see the performances, because that's what's supposed to be selling this version. Not big castles, not big battle sequences. So, to me, I think, was that the cheap way out? Not really. When you have a Denzel Washington and Frances McDermott, you're relying on them to sell it. But there is also the problem of, well, what if you can't? You got to be very careful with those aspect ratio choices. And will people get sucked out because, there's lines on the left and right? I don't like to see that. So on their TV, they'll hit the zoom and screw it up. And
that's such a problem because so many people want to play with different aspect ratios. There's no more standard aspect ratio.
It's gone.
You get you never know how much image you're going to lose. And as like you said, if you're watching it on a certain TV, like you've got these big black bars going across the top and the bottom. Whereas like a film that did it more successfully, I think, and I didn't realize it was shot in this aspect ratio at first. I kept thinking I had a bad download of it and I had to look it up and find out. But was The Lighthouse, and they committed to that. And I think they shot that extremely well using the ratio that they wanted to use.
Right. That was a purposeful 1:3:3 or 4:3 aspect ratio, just like the old movies from the 40s and the 50s.
Because it's like you said, they were going to be focusing on the face a lot of these two particular actors.
Which in case in point, that's where it was effective. Versus this version of Macbeth. But those technical aspects, they do have to be pointed out. Granted, most people are going to be watching this on their phone. The point is the way it's supposed to look.
Yeah, you just hurt me so much saying that.
It's a tragedy, but it happens.
Think of anybody watching movies on their phone.
That's it.
Yeah. I will say that the most effective shots that I've seen in this movie generally involved close-ups on Denzel or someone like that. Where you can kind of see their face a lot more. Right,
and that's the point of it.
Yeah.
So once again, when we talk about modern audiences, it's there's a whole generation that has absolutely no idea, that things were filmed in 1:3:3, 4:3 aspect ratio. They have no idea. and they're used to the Marvel or Star Wars aspect ratio, and that's what they want to see for everything, supposedly. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a level of you know, I always say it's harder to unwash a brain than wash it. Mm-hmm. So this is a situation where, you know, you stick by your guns cinematically, and you now have to put out disclaimers. You know, this is the aspect ratio. I think you have to do that now. And you have to put out a disclaimer too, whether or not it's shot on film or video, because they're not the same thing. It leads people into a false sense of security, and it's not honest. It's one of those things where, look, there was a line drawn in the sand, not more than 15 years ago, maybe, where you're a videographer or you're a filmmaker. You're not both. You're not one or the other. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's just it. But now anybody who is anybody can pick up a cheap DSLR camera and call themselves a filmmaker, and even worse, win an award. Mm-hmm. So where does that put everybody? So when you look at like the Tragedy of Macbeth, you know, this was purposeful. They did this purposely. This is the format they chose. This is the aspect ratio they chose. They were committed to it, and they went for it. And okay, that's brave. They were being honest with what they were doing. And sometimes that rubs modern audience viewers wrong, because they want it to be a film. It is a film. Well, no, it is not. It's a video. You know, that's just the bottom line of it. That's why it doesn't look like all the other stuff. All the questions I always get bombarded with, why doesn't it look like this? Because it was shot on video. It's not a film. Like
from my perspective, I haven't. There was a number of years where I made films. I still use the word films just because that's the word that's used. But I shot everything on video. Video was just easier, cheaper, faster for somebody who's got no budget at all. That's the way you went. But I put a lot of effort into putting back into it the things that my brain knew was film. Putting in film grain, playing with the color palette, pumping up the saturation, pumping up the contrast, things like that you weren't going to get in video, and then putting special lenses on the end of my camera so that I could get depth of field, something you don't normally get with video because it's got a zero range of focus. Everything is crisp to infinity, so you've got to trick it in order to get it. And this is a film that would have benefited, if you want to do it in black and white, it would have benefited far more from doing it on film than you can ever do digitally. Black and white just works best on film.
Shows.
It does. Mm-hmm. It does. And I thought, that was one thing that really, hit me hard, because I was like, wow, it would have looked lovely. Even mm-hmm. with the 4:3 aspect, the 4:3 aspect ratio, it would have looked amazing. The costumes, everything. I love the costumes. I love the production design of all that. I mean, that was great. I was like, oh wow, that's pretty slick. But to see it lit, shot on video, there were times where I could also see the machine stitching on all the clothing. And I'm like, well, that's a little too much for me. That sucks me out.
That's what happens when you start shooting in 4K. I remember watching, I think it was the Hobbit films that they shot in 4K. That was the first big release in 4K. And they have these close-ups, and I can see the pros aid sticking the beards to the dwarves' faces. Right. And I was like, man. So that's too much definition.
And even at its highest, if you're shooting 35 millimeter film, 4K is the route to go. But that's where your film stock and lighting properly helps you. Mm-hmm. It's not hiding anything, but it's saturating your colors, and it would make it look more otherworldly. If you asked me, this Macbeth would have looked more otherworldly if it was shot on film. It would have really lended itself, to that German expressionism. Yeah. Don't fake it till you make it. And that's kind of my point with such a big production like this. This is Joel Coen. This is Denzel Washington. This is Francis McDermott. And my fear for the future is this is what we're going to get? Is this what we're going to get? Everything shot on video. Just because it's supposedly faster, easier, cheaper. That's not the point. These are already seasoned filmmakers. So to me, it's like they're taking a step back. Yeah, that's the tragedy.
unless you still get a few guys like Tarantino who love the old
Yeah.
films. I love the lenses and the film stock he was using on the Hateful Eight. Just the image quality on that is amazing. And I'm not a guy who hates on shooting everything on video because I shout on it and I see the benefits of it. But I would feel a great loss if film just went away.
Well, this is something that really disturbs me. And when I see a movie like Macbeth, I'm like, well, guys, we got to retain. If you're doing something classically, treat it classically, cinematically.
Yeah.
So don't take it away from your audience. Give them that pleasure. Give them that spectacle, because that's what they deserve. And it's almost like, I mean, even with newer films like, dare I say it, Matrix Resurrection, it looks like a video game.
Yeah.
Versus the old film where they had different color saturations, they were doing different techniques with the lights to give it that green look. They, it had a really unique look. And even when they try to do flashbacks of all that other stuff, it wasn't working well. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, it doesn't match. It looks weird. So is this our new era, a video game? Macbeth?
You can kind of see the unnaturality. Now, in the case of the Wachowskis, in some cases, their stuff looked like a video game because they actually were doing tie-ins to video games.
Yeah, they've gone.
So, I mean, but when you start seeing it in a movie like Macbeth, yeah, that's a bad thing.
Well, the Wachowskis have gone full George Lucas prequels where everything was on green screen. So even with the today's CGI, it's got all this artificiality to it. But I'll tell you, nothing takes me out of a thing that I'm expecting it to be a movie. And I know Lance will see this too. Every time you're watching something and you can see when they switch cameras and they switch to a video camera and they haven't gone through the pains that I talked about going through to make something look like film. And you're like, okay, this feels like a TV camera.
Right. And
this feels like a TV camera now.
And the bottom line is, and I have a lot of director photographies agree with me. You cannot make digital look like film. You can't do it. You can put as many filters on it as you want in post. You can try to desaturate it. You can do whatever you want, but it will never be there. So my attitude is embrace your format. Embrace it. Mm-hmm. Don't try to make it look like something else. Just embrace it. So I felt with Macbeth, they did embrace it, but it didn't fit the subject matter. It didn't fit what needed to happen for that film. And that's a deadly thing now, because I'm not going to say young movie makers. I'm going to say modern movie makers. They're all making the same mistake. Okay, I'm going to shoot this in 12K, and nobody's ever going to see that 12K version. Nobody. So don't do it. 4K, your eye is good enough for 4K. That's what your eye's for. Go for that and embrace your format, but still make it quality. Light it well, have good lenses, photography, know your composition. Mm-hmm. But that's to me one of the deadliest things about this movie is that, okay, a modern person might say, well, I'm going to do Shakespeare now. So they're going to pick up their video camera and go do it. And it's like, okay, time out, put a little bit more effort into it. That's all I'm saying. Put a little bit more effort into it. But that's a whole different conversation. I mean, we can go into for forever because but it is an affliction today. So overall, that's one big thing that stuck me out of the Tragedy of Macbeth is that, they went that route. They went the route of what everybody's doing. And if you want to stand out, you don't do what everybody's doing. You do something special.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to give this movie a score and then just kind of leave it there? Because I think we've pretty thoroughly discussed this film today.
I think we did it right on the hour. Yeah, I'll go with I'm going to give it a 4. I'm giving it a 4.
Okay.
I am significantly more generous. Again, probably because of my own personal biases, but I'm going to give it a solid 7.
I was thinking 7.5, and I'll go ahead and tell you what IMDb gave it just after looking this up.
Yeah, what's the comparison?
Just a little lower than me, 7.4.
Huh? Okay.
So it looks like this time, because you gave it a 4, that probably would bring this down probably closer to a 5 or a 6. So I would say we are actually under the IMDb score by a fair amount.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, guys! You guys kicked ass, and yet now you have me here not debating. I mean, that score 6.5. It's above being horrible, which means give it a chance. So let me. I'm not a big Shakespeare guy, but I'll definitely check it out. Even though I understand Shakespeare, all our lives are Shakespearean in a sense, especially when
Well,
we're
he
creators.
understood the human condition better than any other writer in history. I mean, he really understood people, and that's
Right.
why he's such an enduring writer, and why these films keep getting made over and over again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know, just like the Shadewing films and Bracey films and Lance Lucero films are gonna keep being made throughout life. Don't worry, man.
Absolutely. Well, this was fun. I did look forward to talking about this.
Oh, so always a great time talking about cinema.
Yep.
Yeah, can't wait. So, do you guys know what you guys are gonna cover next? Can I get a tease?
Well, before Nemesis took ill again, we had considered talking about the Full Monty. So I don't know if that's still on deck or not.
You should do it. You should do it. But please stay dressed, guys.
Yes. I think you need them for the Full Monty. For sure.
Exactly.
It's a great movie that introduced a lot of people to a lot of British actors they weren't aware of before. Like one of my personal favorites, Robert Carlyle.
Yeah, he's good.
Okay.
Yep. So that may be on deck. We'll have to regroup, see what happens.
Maybe. I think that's the one you should do next. But again, just stay dressed. But if you are gonna be shirtless, at least please make sure to shave. All right, guys.
And do some push-ups.
Only my nipples.
Hey,
fat nipples.
I could see sun nipples now, and then nothing but hair around.
Going full John Cena with you just wear the Peacemaker helmet.
Oh, say Obi-Wan Cena.
Obi-Wan Cena.
It's okay. I haven't even been wearing pants the whole time, so.
Oh.
Please don't get up while we do the
Yes, don't bow. Don't get up and bow. All right, guys. This was fun.
It was great. So, Lance, Shadewing, Bracey, thank you. Fam, follow the family at the bottom. We've been showing it throughout Cinema Crusaders. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter. And guess what? If you even look up comiccrusaders.shop, it goes straight to their section on Comic Crusaders. So this is how Cinema Crusaders got it. They got it locked down everywhere. So
thanks to Big Al in the chair.
Thanks to Big Al. Big Al makes it happen. Crusaders Cinema.
Not just me, man. It's just you guys being amazing. And with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, checking us out. Make sure to please follow Everything Cinema. Check out comiccrusaders.com. Check out the podcast. Check out undercovercapes.com. Check out the whole familia because we're killing it in pop culture and more. By fans, for fans. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Night, everybody.
Good night.